Welcome, friends, to a gathering place for the curious and the brave. Do you ever feel a shiver run down your spine on a perfectly ordinary day? Does the rustle of leaves in the wind sometimes whisper secrets in your ear? We delve into the realm of the unexplained. These are true stories, whispered through generations, passed down from campfire to campfire, each one abrush with the unseen. So settle in, adjust the lights, and prepare to be chilled. Tonight, we share true scary stories. About a year ago, I was asked if I wanted to play some online MMO by one of my friends. At the time, I didn't know just how much trouble a game would be able to cause me in real life. Let me start off by saying that I haven't ever really been an avid gamer. I wasn't even aware you could have in-game chats with people. I didn't know what to do, really. I wanted to give this online gaming thing a try, though, since all my friends said it was so much fun. I joined a fairly large guild, and some veteran players were kind enough to show me the ropes. Thanks to everyone's help, my character grew, and I ended up enjoying my new gaming experience. One of the best players was this guy named Masaru. He seemed to be a pro or something. He was amongst the highest rated in our guild, and boasted about his armory of rare and difficult-to-obtain items. He seemed to have all the rare and best stuff, and everyone looked up to him. Masaru seemed to care about me the most. I don't know if that's because I was the only girl on the team or what. He helped me raise my level and gifted me loads of cool weaponry and armor that he said he didn't need anymore. Everyone in the guild was surprisingly close to one another. They had regular Skype calls after they were done gaming and even met up in real life as well. We used Skype to speak to one another while we played. Eventually, we exchanged email addresses as well. Most of the members lived in Kanto and Kanai. I lived in Hokkaido, so I never attended any of those offline meetings. It was just too far for me to go. There were too many meetings for me to attempt to go to any of them as well. Just too frequent. Just to let you know, the distance between Hokkaido and Kanai is about 24 hours. That's 1,500 kilometers, or 956 miles. I wasn't really careful enough about what I was doing online, though. I realize that now. Without a single thought, I shared bunches of personal information about myself with people I had never met before. Thankfully, I didn't reveal my exact address or my phone number. I'm really glad I didn't do that. Let me tell you a bit more about Masaru. He was a student living in Kanai, and it seemed like every time I logged in to play, he was immediately there ready and waiting for me. He was super eager to spend time with me, and I would get messages from him from the moment I logged in. "Ah, I found you. Oh, by the way, what are you doing at the moment? Are you alone? Or maybe not. I guess you could be with someone." He would send messages to me in the one-on-one chat, excluding all the other members of the guild. He would send them to me while we were playing as a group, and when we were doing our own solo plays. I responded dutifully to begin with, but one day I was busy playing with another one of my friends in another group, and I forgot to reply. When I saw I'd missed his messages, I just thought to myself, well, I'll reply later. He then sent a message to the main chat everyone can see who plays the game, that he was supposed to be playing with someone, but they ditched him. He then went off in search of me, to see what I was doing. I know it's only a game, but this was a little bit weird that he did that. I probably should have realized that was an early red flag. He started talking to me in the open environment anyone could see. It felt as if I needed to apologize for not getting back to him in our private chat. I said sorry, and he replied with, "It's okay, Mori. If you have more fun playing with others than playing with me, then..." After replying to me, he logged out. This guy was always logged in. I was shocked by his lack of embarrassment. My friends were shocked by his weird behavior too. It was so creepy to come over and follow me everywhere in game and do this lame sulky quitting thing. I began to realize at this point that he had a bit of an unusual obsession with me. Every time I logged in from that day forward, I would immediately get a message from him. I'm certain that he would sit there waiting for me to log in and monitoring my location in the game every day. Needless to say, this was very unsettling behavior. I didn't feel like dealing with him for a while, so I planned on turning the game off and giving it a break, not logging on for a couple of weeks or so. Well, after a day at best of not having logged on, I got an email notification to my phone. I bet you can guess who those emails were from. "Hey, why haven't you logged in for a while? I feel lonely without Maury. I guess you hate me, but I don't understand. I like you so much." At first, it was just the chat in the game. Now it was getting closer to harassment in actual life. I wasn't interested in Masaru becoming part of my private life. On top of it all, he was a college student and I was a fully working adult. I didn't really have time to deal with someone who seemed to have endless hours of free time. The emails began coming in on the hour. It was a nightmare. Sometimes they would come in the middle of the night and wake me up. Other times he'd spam me hundreds when I was away at work or on a break. It was way too much. I decided I needed to do something. Hey, when I'm playing games, I want to have fun with everyone. I don't want to give you special attention. I had no intentions of doing that, and if you felt that way, I'm sorry, but I have no special feelings for you, and I want to make that clear. And please, stop sending me all these messages at all hours of the night. It's so annoying. In a matter of seconds, I immediately got a response from Masaru. He sent an emoticon that he used all the time and nothing more. I sighed at the sight of that and blocked my phone. I was just really tired. From that day onwards, I stopped speaking to him entirely and stopped playing the game online. I just couldn't enjoy it anymore. After 3 weeks of quitting playing, I got an email from someone else I used to play with. "Hey, haven't seen you online recently. Maybe you got busy, but we all miss you here, so if you ever get lonely, log back on." Masaru seems to be a lot busier these days. He quit university or something, and we don't see him log in at all anymore. I felt a bit of an ominous feeling reading that email. Having said that, though, I decided I would log back in when I was free. I replied that I'd completely forgotten about the whole thing because I was so busy working as a certified instructor. Basically, I visited educational bodies and gave them free trials of products as a means of my company to get work. At the end of each free trial period, participants were asked to fill out a survey. It was a simple questionnaire where you could enter your thoughts on the instructor, me obviously, and what you made of the class and the content. We asked our participants to fill this out online. One day, I was looking through the questionnaires at the office and compiling the results into a data chart. That was part of my job. As I was scrolling through the entries, I froze. My hand stopped rolling the wheel of my mouse. I saw one had an attached picture of Masaru's emoticon he used all the time, and his email address attached as well. It felt like all the hairs on my body were standing on end. He'd somehow found me. He had attended my class in person. I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. I racked my brain to try and remember incidences in which I might have revealed such personal information about myself to him. I think I may have told him I worked in Hokkaido's largest area, but nothing more than that. I couldn't be too sure I'd never given him any other information, though. I was so scared that day I ended work early, and instead of going home, I decided to see my parents. They lived a good 200 kilometers or 125 miles away. I stayed with them that night. It helped that I wasn't supposed to be working the following day. It was a scheduled day off. In the coming days, I informed my guild friends about Masaru and let them know I had to leave the game for good. I was told that he'd informed the guild he was looking for a job in Hokkaido, right near the area where I lived. I knew I needed to do something about this, so I changed my phone number, email address, and quit my job as well. I moved away from Hokkaido a few months after and met a guy that I ended up falling in love with. We got married and everything's been fine so far, although some of what went down was my fault for sharing too many personal details about myself online. It was truly frightening to discover that some person I'd only interacted with in a game would go to such lengths to track me down in person. I had no idea someone from a game could be capable of acting like that. I guess for some it may not seem as scary written down, but to me, the person who lived it, it was truly terrifying. I don't think I'll ever be as shocked as I was in that moment when I saw the online questionnaire filled in by him and found out he was prowling around my area. That's the reason I'll never play online games again. I was driving home from work pretty late one night. I often worked later hours, and during this time would leave work at about 10:30, then get back home at 11 p.m. or so. My job was in the city, and I lived a ways outside of it, in a much more quiet area. After leaving my job, I would take a freeway back for most of the drive, and then exit onto a highway. Well, one time when I was working earlier, there was a traffic jam. I found a shortcut to get home a bit faster. It was a few more turns, but no stoplights at all, and in my opinion, much easier driving. Or, at the very least, driving that I liked better. Depending on traffic, it could be slightly faster or slightly slower. On a night like this, when there was virtually no traffic on the freeway because it was so late, it was probably a slower route. But I was in the habit of driving the shortcut already. The habit had started when I worked earlier shifts and got off when the roads were busy. On this night, I was taking these back roads to my house. These roads were very quiet, with some woods and occasionally the quiet neighborhood or person's house off to the side. I was probably about 10 minutes away from my own home. The roads I was driving on were really quiet, so I wasn't expecting to see any other vehicles at all. This was exactly how I liked it, really. It made for easy driving. As I was going down a straight spot in the road, I noticed something up ahead. There was what looked to be some kind of construction going on. As I got closer, I saw many orange cones and a person holding a sign on the right. It was one of those stop signs that lights up, and a construction worker holding it directs traffic to where they're supposed to go. There was a man in an orange vest holding the sign and standing on the side of the road. This was a one-lane road. There was a lane for traffic going in the opposite direction as well. However, the lane had been blocked off by two orange construction cones that were there. I began to slow down as I got closer. When I did, I was starting to wonder what exactly was going on here. There was only one person that I could see, the guy holding the sign, and no other construction workers at all. Other than the few cones spread out, I didn't see any kind of work being done either. Still, I didn't pay all that much attention. I was tired from a long day at work and just wanted to get home. I slowed my car down. I came to a stop as the man held the stop sign up, and when I did, the man holding the sign started walking into the middle of the road, right in front of my car. I remember he was about average height and had long dark brown hair. When he started walking over to my car, I started to really wonder what the hell was going on here. The guy stopped about a foot away from my vehicle, directly in front of it. He was just kind of staring at me, not saying anything or communicating in any way. I was sitting there with what must have been a puzzled look on my face. I saw the guy looking back behind my car and saw something else out of the corner of my eye in my side mirror. I looked back. I saw another man. this guy obviously not a construction worker. He emerged from out of the woods on the side of the road. It was really bizarre. But even more strange was that this man was holding what appeared to be a baseball bat and was quietly approaching my car from behind. He was about 50 feet away if I had to guess. I wondered to myself, what on earth was happening here? I just wanted to drive away. It seemed there was no real construction going on at all. The whole thing looked like a trap. The guy holding the sign was still there, stopping me from going forward. I rolled my window down just a crack and asked what was going on. The man didn't answer me. The other guy with the bat was still approaching from behind, and now getting much closer. I knew I needed to get out of there right now. I put my car into reverse and backed up. As I did, the man with the bat was less than 10 feet away. I veered to the left extremely fast and swerved away from the man holding the sign. He tried to get back in front of me and block my path again, but he was not fast enough. I drove away as I ran over the orange cones. Luckily, they were the smaller kind. As I sped away from the area, I saw the two men now standing together in the middle of the road. I felt lucky to have narrowly escaped that situation. Before I got home, I called the police and reported what I'd seen. I'm guessing by the time an officer got there, though, the men were already long gone. I continued to drive that same route home, even after that experience. It was just so routine that I didn't want to change it. Well, just about a week after the initial incident, I was driving home once again. It was around the same time, maybe 10:30 or 11 p.m. at night. I came up to just about the same part on the quiet road, and I could not believe my eyes. I saw the very same guy in his construction clothes, holding the stop sign again. The two cones were on the road in the exact same spot as before. How could this be happening? It was literally the exact same situation as the week prior. This time, though, I didn't slow down at all. I sped up. As I got closer, the man went to take a step into the road and started waving his arm to try and stop me. I pressed on the gas even harder. The man had to jump out of the way, and I mowed down the two small orange cones they'd put out. I kept driving as the man stood on the other side of the road. I called the cops once again. That situation made me really angry. How could the same guy be back out there in the exact same spot, doing the same trap again? I really don't know if they were found after, because I didn't hear anything about it. I didn't see them again, though. It was surely a trap. I'm not sure what the guy's plan was, maybe to steal my car, or something else. The area on the road where they had set up was a very quiet area. No houses or buildings or anything like that in the immediate area. Plus, it was a long straightaway. I'm hoping they were never able to actually stop anybody. A few years ago, my husband was laid off, so I began working part-time to help out until we could get back on our feet. I worked at several places during this time, but my longest-term position was at TJ Maxx. Even though the job could make me crazy sometimes, my boss treated me very well and allowed me to work extra hours if I needed them. Because of the nature of the job itself, the turnover rate was very high, and most of the employees were young. They didn't last long. Those who did spent most of their time complaining and screwing around on their phones. Not that I can say I blame them. All in all, I stayed there for over a year or so. I think I was the longest-lasting employee when I finally moved on, except for two young men. They had been at that location ever since it opened, and probably would both still be there had one of them not lost control and done something terrible to the other. For the sake of the story, I'll call the two men Joe and Steve. Joe was tall and boastful, while Steve was short and fat, with a strange speech impediment that made him sound like he was using baby talk all the time. I honestly can't think of a better way to describe it. Both barely showered as well, which made it very difficult to be around them. I think management even brought this up to one or both of them more than once, but it did very little good. They didn't seem to understand why anyone would care. I gradually came to the conclusion that they were both probably on the spectrum somewhere, especially Steve. Mind you, I don't say this to mock them at all. I just think it helps to grasp why maybe they did some of the things they did. Steve was a very kind person once you got to know him. This was made difficult by his hygiene issues, of course, but on the rare occasion I was able to stand being around him for more than a few minutes. I really got a kind vibe coming off of him. While Steve gave everyone who knew him a good vibe, Joe certainly did not. He was everything you pictured when describing a quote-unquote neck beard. I'm sure he would have had the beard had management allowed it. Although his aversion to bathing made him unapproachable, his cocky attitude made things even worse. There wasn't a single subject that he wasn't apparently an expert in, nor a person he didn't vastly outpace in intelligence in his mind. Had he actually been as smart as he claimed, he may have been somewhat interesting to talk to. But within minutes of meeting him, you could immediately tell he knew very little about anything at all. I remember at one point hearing him getting into an argument with an African-American customer where I heard him calling her a slur. This incident, along with a few others, showed me that Joe was certainly not a nice guy. As you can probably tell by now, I couldn't stand the guy myself. For some reason, even though Steve was the complete opposite of Joe, they were pretty much inseparable. I suppose when you feel unable to navigate the world around you, it's comforting to be friends with another person just as lost as you are. As sweet as Steve could be, his inability to sometimes grasp the norms of society could really bite him in the butt. For instance, I hadn't been working with him long before I noticed how much he loved pretty girls, especially their hair. I remember one specific occasion where he really lost himself and started touching and sniffing a girl's hair. Luckily, she had an autistic son of her own and realized he meant no harm. After a discussion with the manager, it was decided to move him to the back where he wouldn't have to interact with people. He didn't mind it much, though. In fact, before long, Joe got moved to the back too, after his aforementioned clash with the African-American customer. I guess this is the point in the story where I should address the event that led to Joe losing his job. It wasn't something that anyone could see coming. Steve and I were in the back discussing a stalking issue when he made a certain comment I really didn't like. The subject involved the race of a customer, if you get my drift. I'd had enough of all his crap and called him out on it. A sneer grew across his face and he said something to the effect of, "Shut your mouth, you fat cow." That was when something surprising happened. Steve interjected himself and told Joe to leave me alone. They started fighting. Witnessing the argument between these two best friends was a bit disorienting. Steve was really getting the upper hand on him though, which made me chuckle a bit. That made Joe furious. He lunged at me to attack me. Steve placed himself between us, but Joe didn't lose a step at all. He shoved Steve onto the floor. He then grabbed his best friend and began pummeling him mercilessly. He continued beating him in the face until a few other employees managed to pull him off and threw him into a rack of clothes. Now his face showed it all. He knew he'd screwed up and nothing could save him. With an indignant smirk, he stood up and dusted himself off. Steve was curled up on the floor crying. Joe actually had the audacity to spit on him. We all stared back in shock as he turned and walked out the back door of the store. Now that the immediate threat was gone, I went over to Steve to check on him. He had a bloody nose and a badly bruised face, but thankfully that was about it. He had curled up into a ball almost as soon as the attack began. I figure that's what saved him from being injured even more. It was so sad the way Steve kept wiping the tears from his cheeks and saying it wasn't right what Joe was saying, because we were all supposed to be friends here, and friends don't talk like that. It was very heartbreaking. The decision was made not to call the police in the end. Once he'd gotten all his anger out, Steve was back to his regular kind and caring self. He didn't want Joe to go to jail. The rest of us were just happy that jerk was finally gone for good. Joe obviously knew he was fired because he never returned or contacted anyone at the store. A new person was eventually hired to take up Joe's spot, and we never brought up the incident again. As far as I'm aware, Steve is still working there to this day. I left about 6 months after, when my husband was called back to work. In spite of all the times I complained about his hygiene and stubbornness, I sort of find myself missing Steve sometimes. His simple view of life really made him especially kind, and as complicated as it could be, I wish more people were like him. Maybe the world would be a little bit nicer to each other if they were. I was up until around 3 a.m. at night when I received a strange call from an unknown number. I shrugged it off, since the week before I'd bought a new phone. I thought nothing of it. The same person called over the next few days though, always at the exact same time of night. Eventually I gave in and picked up the phone. The person on the other end of the line warned me of a strange figure watching me every night through the window. I didn't recognize the voice of the caller, and even if it was somebody I knew, messing with me in this way was too much. I was way too tired to recognize their voice, therefore I just kinda shrugged it off. I didn't actually believe there was somebody watching me, and why would an anonymous person call me up and try to warn me? A couple of days later, after returning home from work, I noticed a black van parked in a very strange spot, not too far away from where I live. The reason I thought it was weird, though, was because the van was parked in such a way that anybody who looked out through the windows could possibly peer into my bathroom. At the time, I didn't really think anything of it, though, since again, I was too tired to actually care. 2 nights later, I received a phone call again. The person on the other end said, "The very memory of my face will cause a manifestation of my being in the future. You will be asleep in bed, and I'll be there watching over you. When you wake up, you'll not be able to move any part of your body. When the doctors eventually find you, they won't see me, but you will. I'll see you too, forever. I'll see ya." After that strange call, I decided to go to the police and ask them if they knew anything about other strange calls happening around town. The police said nobody but me had reported any such thing from an unknown number. After that, I decided to move out, as I didn't want to risk my own life. At that point, whether it was a prank call or not, it was just something I did not want to risk with all the strange events going on. Once I left, nothing like that ever happened again. I'm typing this on my phone, so sorry for the grammar or any mistakes, and for the length of the story itself. I know most other stories shared are a bit longer, so I don't know. Sorry, I just wanted to share my own. Well, I say it's mine, but maybe that isn't strictly true. I heard about this from a friend of mine who doesn't have any interest of sharing their own stories online, so I said I could do it for them. My friend's a nurse, and this happened while she was working at a certain general hospital. In this certain hospital, there was an open secret among the staff. Unpleasant things was how some described it. Others said it was paranormal activity, and others plain just didn't want to talk about it at all. Most of the alleged events happened during the night shift. It was common that nurses would get calls from empty rooms, as if someone unseen was pressing the nurse call button next to an unoccupied bed. Because of the strange phenomenon going on, the nurses asked and were granted permission to walk the wards in pairs on the night shift. This is my friend's experience of what happened when she was working the night shift that night. She was doing her rounds of the wards with a colleague when they got to a room they knew was unoccupied. Since they had been called, though, they were duty-bound to go in and check it out. They arrived at the empty room, and before they even walked into it, they knew they would find it empty. They were right, of course. They scanned the room as per the rules. It was only when they were about to turn to leave when my friend noticed something that was certainly out of place. She looked down toward the floor for some reason, and that was where she spotted something sticking out from below the curtain. The curtains were attached to rails that ran along the ceiling, the type that could be pulled to separate space for patients, a sort of room divider, if you will. There, just creeping under the curtain, in the gap between the floor and the bottom, appeared to be someone's hand. It was grasping and searching for something. My friend said the hand looked unwell. The two nurses had just looked over every inch in the room, and there had been no one in there. They were seeing something their eyes couldn't believe, and their minds could not explain. My friend isn't the squeamish type at all. I mean, what nurse is? She kept her cool and pointed out the disembodied hand to her colleague. They both quickly and calmly exited the previously unoccupied room and went back to the nurse's station. Her colleague, who by the way was her senior in every sense of the word at work and in age, told her not to worry about what she had just seen. What did she mean by that? Don't worry? Who wouldn't worry about seeing something as strange as that? My friend pressed her colleague for an explanation of what they had just seen. Reluctantly, her colleague shared some information. It said that disembodied earth-colored hands were spiritually signs of organ failure. Did they see some manifestation from a previous patient? It gives me chills to imagine seeing that grasping hand underneath the curtain that might have belonged to a previous patient who had passed away. Maybe it was a spirit trying to get the attention of the nurses in their final moments. But who can really say? This story takes place back in the summer of 2021. During that time, I had just recently gotten a new car. Before that, I had been driving an old 2004 Chevy Trailblazer. If you don't know, that's an SUV. I didn't think it would be worth that much, but I still decided to sell it on Craigslist. After all, that's where I'd bought it from years earlier, and I had taken very good care of it for the most part. I took some pictures out of my driveway and then listed the car. It ran pretty well and was very reliable, so I knew somebody was bound to be interested. I listed it for $2,000 and waited. I wasn't in that much of a rush to sell it, really. It took about 2 days before I got the first response to the ad. The response was someone asking if the car was still for sale. I said yes, and they texted back, asking if they could come take a look at it. We arranged a meeting for after the person got off work the following day. I asked for their name, and they said it was Barry. Said they got off work at around 8 p.m. I suggested we meet in the parking lot of a nearby Walmart. It was a really big lot and would also be a public area. I certainly didn't want a random person to show up to my house. Barry agreed, and the very next day I drove out to the Walmart. It was only about 5 minutes away from my home. I got there early and looked around the parking lot. I told him I was in the very back corner, and you really couldn't miss me. The parking lot was always empty in the back half, so it was often used for truckers and RVs to park overnight. The first red flag happened before Barry even showed up at all. I should have driven away right there and then. He texted me, saying he was already there and asking what my car looked like. I was thinking, seriously, you're the one interested in buying this car and you don't even remember what it looks like? I gave him a description of my gray SUV in the back corner. He then replied saying he saw me and was driving over now. I looked around and saw a much newer looking car approaching me. It looked to be a red Ford Focus that must have been only a few years old. He parked right next to me, and I watched a man get out. He was younger looking, maybe 30 or so, had dark brown hair and black glasses. I got out of my car and walked over to him. We met in front of my car and shook hands, and I told him some basic information. As he looked at it, less than a minute later, he asked me if we could go for a test drive. I said yes. Barry got into the driver's seat of my car, and I got into the passenger seat. I noticed he was on his phone a lot in the short time since he'd gotten out of his vehicle. Something just seemed a little bit strange about this guy. When he started driving, I asked him if he knew this area well. I said he could drive down some roads close by. He said he knew it very well, and we left the Walmart. We headed to a quieter area. Barry went down a road I had only been on a couple of times before. It was a somewhat quiet road with a speed limit of 35. There were patches of woods here and there, and some buildings that appeared to be industrial in nature. During the drive, things were very quiet. I talked about the car for the first couple of minutes, but Barry didn't really respond or say anything back to me. I remember him looking at his phone once while driving, and I told him he shouldn't do that. He said sorry and put it away. I asked him how he thought the car was driving and if he liked it. He said yes, it was good. After 5 minutes of driving around, I was starting to think that we should begin heading back now. And that's when Barry suddenly began slowing down. He pulled off the road and into this really creepy-looking parking lot. We were surrounded on all sides by woods, and the parking lot itself was in disrepair. It looked to be for some sort of warehouse. When he got into the lot, he drove a little ways in and stopped the car. I noticed there was one other vehicle parked in this lot already. I thought at first maybe Barry just wanted to turn around in there, but when he stopped the car, I was really confused. He shut off the engine and took the key out of the ignition. He then opened his driver's door and started to get out. I was really confused, watching him and wondering what was going on. As he was getting out, he yelled at me to get out of the car. I looked to my right and saw 3 men getting out of the other vehicle that was also in the parking lot. The 3 men were advancing towards us. They were about 50 feet away. These men started moving at a fast pace, and Barry stepped out in front of my car. He began yelling at me to get out again. I knew I was in trouble at that point. I didn't know what these guys wanted, but I realized something quickly. My car had 2 keys for it, and I had brought the spare just in case. It was in my pocket. After Barry saw I was not getting out of the vehicle, he started walking over to my passenger door. I figured he was going to try and force me out. Meanwhile, the other 3 men were only 20 feet away. I reached into my pocket and hit the button for the lock on the doors. I moved over to the driver's seat of the car. He reached the door and tried opening it, but it was already locked. In that moment, I put my spare key in the ignition and started the engine. Barry had the other key still and would be able to unlock it if he got it out again. When the car started, I saw him reaching into his pocket and saw the other men begin running. As soon as it was started up, though, I threw it into drive and slammed my foot on the gas. The car jerked away from everyone, and they gave chase on foot for a short time. I sped away and made a quick U-turn. As the men were now running for their vehicle, I drove out of that pothole-filled parking lot as fast as I could. When I was back onto the road, I took the very first turn I saw. The men were not able to reach me in their car on time, and I didn't see them behind me. I was able to get away just fine. I went straight back to my house, and when I made it back home, I called the police. I reported the whole thing. I told them about the car at Walmart as well, that Barry had left behind. I gave as much information as I could. I later found out the car Barry used to get to the Walmart was found still there and came back as stolen. I'm not sure if Barry and those other guys were ever found. I know, I'm just really glad I brought the spare key with me and was able to get away from them. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and that little notification bell so you never miss a story. And if you have your own encounter you'd like to share, leave a comment below. Who knows, it might just find its way into a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the scariest stories are often the ones closest to home.